Well, welcome. I am Dr. Nikki Vincent, the South Australian Commissioner for Equal Opportunity. I'd like to welcome all of our audience members, our event partners and supporters. Thank you for joining us for Democratising Disability, Taking Control. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities recognises the importance of people with disabilities to have the freedom to make their own choices and to be actively involved with decision-making processes about policies and programs. This session will explore the barriers for taking control, regardless of ability or location, and mechanisms to facilitate democracy in the disability sector and community. To begin the session, I'd first like to introduce His Excellency, the Honourable Hugh Van Lay, Administrator of the Commonwealth, to the stage to provide an opening statement. Please join us, Your Excellency.
Well, thank you very much for your warm welcome. I acknowledge Dr. Nikki Vincent, the Commissioner for Equal Opportunity, the number of keynote speakers and panelists, Ms. Joycelyn Nemula, Mr. Maurice Cochrane, and a number of outstanding panelists that will be sharing with you their thought and their insight at today's forum. Ladies and gentlemen, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're gathering here today, the Kaurna people, and we respect their spiritual relationship with the country. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today for this panel as part of the Open State Festival. Last year, the inaugural festival was a resounding success with an overall attendance rate of more than 25,000 people, and this year's event is set to be even bigger. It's wonderful to see so many people, so many South Australians showing an active interest in the future of the well-being and prosperity of our state. Now, ladies and gentlemen, South Australia has a long and impressive, proud history of social innovation. The early settlers arrived on this land with a mission, and to build a society upon the principles of enlightened reforms. The rights of Aboriginal people were to be enshrined alongside religious freedom, the separation of church and the state, franchise, access to education, and many, many other social innovations. Indeed, South Australia was, as famously described by a leading historian, Douglas Pike, was inspired to be a paradise of dissent, a colony where innovation, creativity, and new thinking were not only valued, but also encouraged. Over time, this trend continued. In 1856, our new constitution became one of the most democratic of its kind, of its time. And in 1894, we became the first place in the world where women could not only vote, but also stand for parliament. In addition, the Prohibition of Discrimination Act in 1966 and the Sex Discrimination Act in 1975 were the first of their kind in Australia. Today, we maintain a strong commitment across all sectors of our community to ensure that South Australians of all ages, all backgrounds and abilities are able to participate fully in our society. Our embrace of diversity in all of its forms is one of our state's greatest assets, as is our commitment to collaboration. This panel, brought to us today through a partnership of government and local organisations, is a wonderful example of such collaboration. Under the topic of democratising disability, the panelists will share their views on barriers which prevent our communities to achieve social inclusivity and access to everyone regardless of their ability or location. They will also explore ways to facilitate democracy in the disability and broader community. I'd like to thank the following partners: Paraquat SA, the Lifetime Support Authority, Brain Injuries SA, the Institute of Public Administration Australia, the Department of Communities and Social Inclusion, and of course, Open State. Now, ladies and gentlemen, In a society which is always striving to achieve and maintain a highest level of social inclusivity and equality, there is always more that we can do to assist all of our citizens to reach their full potential. And today is about building upon our impressive achievements and finding new ways to ensure that people with disability can live from a place of empowerment and choice. And I thank the Open State Festival for providing a forum in which this discussion can take place and for fostering innovation, collaboration, and enterprise in South Australia. I thank each and every panelist for their willingness to participate in this forum and sharing their insights and thoughts on the topic of discussion. I look forward to the constructive conversation today that builds a bright and hopeful vision for the future. Thank you and have a wonderful forum. Thank you.
Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to come here today and share my experiences and my journey that took me to the 2016 Rio Paralympics. My journey to the Rio Paralympics doesn't only revolve around sport. So to know who I am and where I am, I'll give you a little bit of background information. So a little bit about me. So I was generally your typical kid growing up. Up until my early teenage years, I was very strongly involved with my local community down on the Fleurieu Peninsula. I was involved in basically any sport I could get my hands onto, whether it be tennis, basketball, badminton, netball. Some I liked more than others and did pursue. So for me, sport and community activities were a really important part of my life, as was school. So when I did become sick and end up in hospital, that really turned my life upside down. I'd gone from being your everyday kid where I could really do anything that I wanted to. I was just gaining my independence. I was really achieving in different areas of my life, whether it be going on the high performance squad of sailing, right through to already completing Year 12 Maths Specialist and Maths Studies as a Year 8 student. So suddenly when all of this got taken away from me, it was really hard to move forward initially. Imagine one day being able to go out on the water, be out sailing, and then less than 12 hours later being on a hospital bed paralysed from head to toe. That was challenging. But time goes on, things change. For me, moving forward was a really big part of this. I had to find things I could do, things I could move forward to, and things I could actually enjoy moving forward. So for me, finding those initial steps to move forward was really challenging. I found that with my diagnosis of a very rare condition, which was the 5th case in the world, and I was the youngest person by 20 years that had been diagnosed with the condition, there wasn't really a lot that was known. I was in and out of hospital. I was told that there was no potential for recovery. I was told that I couldn't go back to school. And school had been such a huge part of my life. I knew that I wanted a future in maths and science because that was something I was achieving at, but suddenly I just couldn't do that anymore. And unfortunately, at the time, there was very little support available to help me move forward. My parents were great advocates and reached out to different organisations to try and integrate me back into the school system, to try and integrate me back into the sports system. But unfortunately, there was very little support available. Fast forward a few years, I was able to reintegrate into sailability, but not without challenges. Unfortunately, having a medical condition where I didn't have the same abilities, where things were unknown. My second time back on the water, I actually ended up back in hospital unconscious, which was a huge barrier in being able to get reintegrated due to safety risks, due to the unknowns of what would happen. That was another factor in day-to-day life that prevented further interaction and socialisation, which resulted in being very isolated. Not being able to go back to school meant that I lost those friendships that I'd had growing up. Not once, even to this day, have I actually ever seen anyone that was in my class when I got sick. And that wasn't very nice. So moving forward was really important. Being able to connect with people that had had similar experiences was really important in my steps moving forward. For me, I was really fortunate that Starlight Children's Foundation was able to connect with me with other people online that had been through similar experiences. That's when I really was able to connect with people that understood where I was at. Having a degenerative condition, having an uncertain future, there were people that had been through that and knew that you couldn't just keep listening to the doctors and the people around, that it's better just to enjoy life and not do much at all. I needed a purpose. I needed something to do with my life because that was so important to me. So I actually managed to start going to uni at 15, turning 16, initially for social inclusion, but then I did actually manage to transfer to a degree. Well, it actually start just handing out work for the Bachelor of Medical Science, which I've just finished my final placement for. So on top of that, I've also become quite involved with the local community through Julia Farr Youth, through Determined 2, through the Lane Beachley Foundation, through Rotary, through Rotaract and similar organisations. For me, being able to share my story and share my experiences and actually prove that there's a way to move forward and actually find a purpose within life, whether it be through sport, through academic, or through work, or through just social connection. I felt that that was really important, to be able to show that there are pathways available to do that. So for me, my passions come over the last 10 years. From being able to do everything, gaining my independence and going through those important milestones as a kid, to having them all taken away from me for a number of years is challenging. It, in a way, was really hard, but it's really built up that passion for me to share my experiences and really share that everyone, regardless of ability, does need a purpose. They need to be able to enjoy life and they need to be able to pursue the goals that they want to pursue. So through working with the Lane Beachley Foundation, through Julia Farr Youth, through Determined 2, I've actually been able to get a passion, be able to identify and work towards my goals. One of those goals were pursuing sport. I was a competitive person in sport growing up. I still am now. That doesn't change. My disability hasn't defined who I am as a person and won't. It's just another challenge that I'm dealing with day to day. So through the process, I really found out that I'm really passionate about being active and engaging with the community, to be a role model, to show people of all abilities that regardless of your ability, you can do what you want. You can pursue your goals. There will always be those people that say no, but there will also be those people that stand by you, support you, and help you achieve your goals. And that's what's most important. And I feel that through my work that I'm doing, through research, I am working in a medical research lab when I'm in Australia, through advocacy, through mentoring, and through actively engaging in the community through all the different organisations is really important, because I feel like by having that connection, that it shows that everyone of all abilities has that right to enjoy life regardless of ability and should get that opportunity to participate, perform and connect. So I've had the ability to run events to promote para-sports within South Australia. I doubled the female participation levels within Disability Sport and Rec SA this year as part of my scholarship with the Lane Beachley Foundation. I've also had the opportunity to connect through mentoring events, through events with the Starlight Foundation, to actually show that regardless of ability, regardless of what doctors tell you, regardless of what your teachers tell you, it's really about what you decide to pursue and the support you reach out to and connect with that allows you to pursue your goals. So my journey to the Rio 20 Paralympics wasn't the one you see in the media. It wasn't just a quick, I joined the sport in December 2015 and go to the Paralympics in September 2015 to 2016. There's a backstory to that. There's lots of challenges that I've faced day to day. Sailing was great to get back to. It was a sport I was pursuing at a high performance level before I got sick, but there just wasn't the support and opportunities that were within South Australia that were available in able-bodied sport. So then to be able to go to para sport, I had to find something that I was actually passionate about. I knew I loved sailing, but there just wasn't that there for me. The same with basketball. I ventured into wheelchair basketball within South Australia early on, but there wasn't opportunity. There's not one person in South Australia that was on an Australian representative team. There was no pathways to move forwards. And I've been part of changing that. I was the first South Australian to get back onto an Australian team post-Rio. But it's an opportunity that people need to know about. There needs to be pathways, there needs to be awareness to move forward. Kids with a disability in South Australia need to know that if they want to pursue sport, there are options. They need role models. They need to know that those options are available, and that doesn't only just come down to parents, providers of services. It comes down to awareness that there are those services available. It comes down to schools promoting that. For me, I entered sport to get out of a cotton wool bubble that I'd been placed in with a hospital system. So I spent 4 to 5 years doing nothing but rehab, and that drove me crazy. I needed something to be able to go and bash a chair against boys. So it was a little bit harder, and that led to a passion that reignited my passion for competitive sport. So to go to the Rio 2016 Paralympics was an amazing opportunity to really connect with people of all abilities and identify my goal. Identify my goal of going to Tokyo 2020 and standing on the podium. But once again, that doesn't come without challenges. Financial challenges. Once again, I was the first para-canoe athlete within South Australia that was wanting to pursue it competitively. So it's an awareness thing. It's awareness of the opportunities available. It's awareness of the community to support these athletes, support these programs, because without support, these programs can't happen. So really coming down to the challenges and barriers I've faced, it was really that despite my background in sport and education, it's really funny that suddenly when you have a disability, everything changes. I was still the same person. Technically, I still had the same ability and knowledge. Yes, I might have an acquired brain injury as part of my illness, but did that actually stop me being able to go back to education? Did that stop me being able to go back to sport? Apparently the doctors thought so. Apparently all the service providers thought so. But where does that stop? Where does that actually come down to going, let's test the barriers. Everyone's an individual. Where does that stop? That's something to really think about, in my opinion, because for 3 years, my life was put on hold. I don't know how it would have turned out differently if I did go straight back into sport, but that's the reality of a degenerative and unknown condition. I could have been missing out on an opportunity I might not have been able to do 2 years later. So it really comes down to assessing things on an individual level, testing things. I wouldn't have known that I could go back to sport unless I first went out and tried it and went out a second time to see whether I improved. Assumptions are horrible. Assumptions are one of my biggest hates, because only the person knows themselves the best. You really need to connect with people. You need to ask the person who it affects. Do they want to do it? How will it affect them? Do they want to give it a go? Don't make assumptions. I have a question shortly for you that I'll ask. Lack of education. People know that to do things individually, to know what pathways and options are available. It provides a much better environment for everyone. So on to my question. If I said right now I wanted to go rock climbing or go to the top of a mast on a tall ship, how many people would think I'd be able to do that initially as a diagnosed cerebral tetraplegic? And how many people would know how to make that happen? People that don't know how to make it happen or wouldn't think I'd be able to do it? No one? How many people would know how to make that happen or know that I should be given the opportunity to give that a try? Yeah, so until you actually see that it's possible, see people doing it, that's what young people need to see. That's what the community needs to see. That just because I'm a diagnosed cerebral tetraplegic, I can still go rock climbing. I can still get to the top of a mast. It might not be the same way that everyone else does it, but it's still possible. It shows that it can be done. It's just a matter of finding a way to make it possible. So for me, my future is uncertain. I do live with a degenerative, unknown, rare condition, but for me, I'm taking it day by day. Like, I love what I do day to day now. I love being involved in the organisations I do. I love training. I love getting on the water. So I'm not going to change it. I'm going to keep doing that until the end, until I can no longer do that. My goals for the next few years are reaching the 2020 Paralympics with a podium finish. I've just got back from World Champs 6 weeks ago, less than 18 months into getting the sport, coming back home with a World Championship title. So I was really happy with that. I felt that really just showed that with the support that can come together within a community, for me, that wouldn't have been possible without the support of SASI. SASI really have picked up on everyone is an individual. Everyone needs the support they require to reach their goals. And if you give people that support, that education, people can reach their goals. I'm also pursuing disability awareness and advocacy. For me, I feel like I'm in a position where I can pursue that. I can have my voice heard. I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to be on a number of boards, including Children and Young People with Disability Australia and also the National Disability Awards judging panel, to actually get that voice out there, to get that heard. Additionally, been on the Ministerial Advisory Committee for Students and Children with Disability, I've been able to share my experiences, share my connection that I have with students today, to even improve the lives of those that come through in the future, because that's ultimately what it's about. I can live my life, but ultimately the impact I want to have is that someone else's journey in the future is better than my own. They don't have to face as many barriers where easily, without the correct advocates and knowledge, they could just be knocked down. Their goals might not be reached, and ultimately no one wants that to happen. Additionally, I do want to pursue medical research. I have just finished the final placement for my degree, and I already do have a job offer within medical research where I've already been working. So for me, that's really important. Having a condition that doesn't have a cure really gives me that desire to find a cure, whether it be for my own condition or for someone else's. Having that certainty in life is really important. And most importantly, to enjoy life. I'm not going to be doing anything I don't enjoy. Life's too short for that. I've had those experiences, and really, for me, it's just about having fun now. Like, I've had some outstanding opportunities. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that I went to the Rio Paralympics last year, or even get to go surfing with Lane Beachley. So, like, it's just all about knowing what opportunities are available, being able to support people with all abilities to pursue their goals, follow their dreams, and actually give them the support and resources to be able to achieve them. So for me, the top tips is allow people to communicate their goals, allow them to follow them, give them the resources they need to be able to pursue them. Don't make assumptions. Also, give it a go, challenge yourself, challenge your clients. Nothing is impossible. Like, if they have a burning desire or dream, what's saying it can't happen? What's saying if it hasn't happened before, they can't be the first person that does make it happen? And for me, I think through my journey, I've really found that for people living with a disability, whether it's your clients, whether it's yourself, reach out. People that are higher up in the field are always willing to help out. Like, send someone a message, ask to catch up. Like, you never know. People at that top level are willing to help. So it's just about connecting, accepting that help, and really allowing people to support you in achieving your goals. So for me, one of my favourite quotes is, "Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is a process, working together is success." Because for me, my journey wouldn't have been possible by myself. For me, being able to connect with people, get the support I have, has allowed me to get where I am today. And it is what allows me to continue moving forward, achieving the things I am. So I'm very fortunate to have the support I do around me, opportunities like this today to share my story. And I really hope that someone somewhere walks away today with a different perspective or knowledge that does improve another person's life. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
I thought it might be helpful to begin with the definition of democracy, which talks about a system of government in which power is vested in the people, who rule either directly or through freely elected representatives. However, the theory of modern democracy was not formulated until the age of Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, when philosophers defined the essential elements of democracy, they being separation of powers, basic civil rights, human rights, religious liberty, and the separation of church and state. From my perspective, I'd like to highlight how I became involved in disability advocacy, disability representative bodies at a state, national, and ultimately international level, representing those bodies at the United Nations headquarters in New York, at their ad hoc meetings, where we helped design and draft the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And I'd like to use today's speech to encourage others with a disability and families or supporters to get involved in the ongoing debate and discussions that lead to policy formulation and future direction of service provision. The disability sector, like other sectors in women's health, in immigration, in Aboriginal services, needs new people to step up and get involved in the debates, discussion and advocacy around issues that affect those population groups. People with lived experience from those population groups need to be directly involved in all the stages of reform through those services. In the disability sector and through the International Disability Alliance, we had an anthem or a theme that basically says, "Nothing about us without us." But first, just a little bit of background about my entry into disability. And we have to go back to Boxing Day, 1976, in a suitcase accident. I had a little suitcase sitting on the back seat of my E.H. Holden, a car that I was very proud of, coming around a narrow country road in the southeast and going down a hill, and there was a car coming the other way, which I had to get off the road slightly to let the car pass. And I got into loose gravel, got into a slide and overcorrected, and my car come back onto the road, clicked the car coming the other way, and as it did, my car went on its side and the suitcase whacked me in the back of the neck, and I was instantly a quadriplegic. The two ambulance drivers that come to the scene of the accident were my brother-in-law and his father. And this quite often happens in the country areas where ambulance drivers first arrive as meeting people they know very well and are attached to. So the initial medical assessment by the doctor at the Mount Gambier Hospital was, as he spoke to my mum and dad, was that your son's a quadriplegic. He's the worst I've ever seen. He'll never be able to do anything for himself or anyone else for the rest of his life. So not only did it affect me, it affected my whole family and friends around me. I was flown to Adelaide in the air ambulance and stayed for 6 weeks in R4, the Specialist Spinal Injuries Unit in the Royal Adelaide Hospital. But about a week later, I received a telegram from my boss back at the panel board, the company that I worked for, where I was doing my 3rd year apprenticeship. And it basically said, look, mate, we're all thinking of you going through what you're going through, but want you to know that if you can do anything at all at the end of this rehabilitation, we want you back here working for us. I later found out that that man, Ken Jones, who was the managing director, had had an accident at a similar time when he was studying at university and had an acquired brain injury, and he went through rehabilitation. And he knew the importance of people reattaching back to the workforce and getting a role. That importance of early intervention and working with people very early on after they acquire a disability is something that I promote heavily and would, support in any way, shape or form. Certainly before people get into the sick role and feel that they have no capacity to move on. The impact for me of getting that telegram was that I was able to focus my rehabilitation at the Hampstead Spinal Injuries Unit and work out ways and things that I might be able to do in administrative roles going back to the company where I worked for. And Jocelyn, this is well before computers were around. So we had the technology that I was using at the time was an electronic typewriter and little sticks that used to attach to my hand to help me type. But after I got out of Hampstead Centre on the 20th of August and returned to Tantanoola to live with my parents and was able to return to work full-time within 2 weeks of leaving the rehab hospital. Something I'm proud of and something that I try and promote about getting back into a useful role and into a routine. What was really important for me, also going through rehabilitation, was coming across people who had lived experience. People who were working in the rehabilitation centre, in the occupational therapy area, or in the physical therapy and weights area, who also used wheelchairs and were able to get it with and alongside of me to help support me, but encourage me, but also give me a kick up the bum when I was feeling a bit sorry for myself at times. And do that in a way that was really important. The same when I returned to Tantanoola and Mount Gambier, where there was an active para-quad association. And those people, Graham Walker in particular, and his mum, were able to talk to mum and dad and talk to me about what was possible, what I may be able to do, the new me. And these mentors were critical for me re-establishing back into a little town and getting back to work. So I occasionally used to come back to rehabilitation centre to do ongoing therapy, and during those times really enjoyed talking to new people going through the rehab centre. And the director at the time at the Spinal Injuries Unit tried to get me a job as a peer counsellor, but that was refused by the health department because I had no qualifications. And that was a barrier initially, but it really forced me to think about getting a qualification. So in respect, they did me a favour. So I began to apply as a mature age student to study social work, and at the same time have a go at living independently in supported housing here in Adelaide when the very early stages back in the mid-80s where there were care attendant support to allow me to live independently. So that was a real challenge, but I got knocked back as a mature age student in my application, and the social worker at the house, the independent living training house, said, well, are you going to take that line down, or are you just going to sit back and sulk, or are you going to go back and see why and what you need to do? So they supported me to make an appointment with the head of social work school and meet about my knockback. So we went to the University of South Australia. It was the Institute of Technology back in those days. Just again shows how old I am. And David Wells and Andrew Stoll helped pull me up all the steps to get into the front of the university. And they accepted me to get in as well. But also, I guess, started studying social work and understanding negotiation and advocacy a little bit more. And I got involved with the PQA, Paraquat Association, then the board, and later as chair. And it was a starting point for me to get involved in an organisation and understanding the importance of people with disability being involved in shaping policy and getting involved in a whole range of areas. Later on, I got to work with an agency called Disability Action and got involved in more advocacy. And we started lobbying for accessible buses and accessible transport back in the end of 1993, just prior to the state election here, and tried to get a commitment from both sides of government to accessible public transport. In those days, there was no way anywhere in Australia that a person in a wheelchair could get on a bus anywhere. And we had issues with people being able to access other mainstream facilities such as education, access to buildings, etc. So through our knowledge and trying to seek as much information as we could through, in those days, Jocelyn, they were called electronic bulletin boards. It was before the internet was up and going. And it's a real history, isn't it? So we built up our knowledge about accessible transport both in Europe and the United States, where it was mandated under their anti-discrimination legislation. And we knew that we had to have a sound evidence-based argument in order to lobby for and get accessible public transport, including the cost-benefit analysis about accessible public transport that leads to increased patronage and better performance by reduced dwell times, etc. So we made to make sure that we knew about it, as much about it as anyone else. So, but I can always remember when we were lobbying after the then Liberal government got into power in '94, and despite them agreeing to have accessible trials of public transport, it started to slip down their agenda a little bit. So we found out that Minister Laidlaw was going to open up all the bus depots on a particular day to show all the new bus fleet that had been transferred from the State Public Transport Authority to TransAdelaide, all been repainted and all rebadged. And a few little advocates decided, what a great day for a protest. So we went to the Mile End Bus Depot. We put out a media release the night before to say that we were going to be protesting. I had my 3.5-year-old daughter sitting on my lap, my wife. It was a real family affair. And we went along, we blockaded the bus depot. There were people like Philip Beddle, Trevor Harrison, a whole range of us that chained ourselves to the gate and blocked people getting in. And the poor old State Transport Authority, or TransAdelaide, wanted to get all this media attention about their new U-Butte bus transport, and of course all the media were interviewed. All they wanted to do was come out and talk to us naughty little advocates. And I guess we promoted the fact that if we didn't get an accessible trial of public transport, we were going to use the Disability Discrimination Act and claim disability discrimination, because we knew it was possible. So, and it was really important for us that we had the power of the DDA to allow us to move forward. So we applied for an interim injunction at that time, because we found out about an order of 50 buses that the state government had on that didn't have ramps to it. So they're going to be low-floor buses, but they weren't going to be accessible to people with disabilities. And Sir Ronald Wilson, who was the then president of the Human Rights Commission, heard that case and agreed to apply the interim injunction, which prevented the State Transport Department going ahead with that order. We were then involved in a full hearing and were able to eventually negotiate getting a conciliation agreement that all public transport from there on would be made fully accessible and that they would trial the new services. Just before the full hearing occurred, Queensland, Victorian and New South Wales governments applied to join the case against us. But I was fortunate enough to go on and work with a range of peak bodies, the Physical Disability Council of Australia and the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, and be involved in the lobbying and the shaping of policy. And again, I would argue that it's really important that we continue to to have people with a disability right at the forefront and centre of new policy development, and it's really important that those people and their families have the opportunity to participate in the shaping of policy from then on. And again, nothing about us without us. Thank you.
So, panel members, let's hear from you on the topic of democratising disability and taking control. How do you do it and how do you support it?
Look, I have to say at Brain Injury SA, we like to make sure that our participants are actually in the driver's seat when it comes to providing person-centred and specialised therapy services for them. So too often we hear that there's therapy provided to the person, but we like to put them in the driver's seat and get them to give us their views and talk to us about their unique goals, because of course everyone is different. So
I think in terms of how do we do it, it's the community education and attitude changes that we need through lived experience. People with lived experience being the trainers and educators of the rest of the population. And Jocelyn and Morris have said that much better than I. But to get to the minds and hearts of everybody in the community to understanding disability, we need to move beyond, and I think public sector, also private sector, could be leaders as employers beyond online training and disability awareness to the lived experience.
Yeah, like just on that, I think there's a huge difference on doing an online training versus actually having someone come in with a lived experience to share their experiences. It's so easy just to take it for granted, but unless there's awareness and education for the entire community, not much can go forward. There's so much you can do to equip people living with a disability to be able to pursue their goals, but ultimately it comes down to a whole community and society effort to reach that next level.
Thanks, Jocelyn. I totally agree with all of those comments. I think the key is that if you're a person with a disability, you need to be the one making the decisions, and it's up to the rest of us to be asking the questions, asking what people need and what they want. And if they can express what they need and what they want, it's then up to disability service providers and the community and society to think, well, how can we make that happen? And often people don't know what they want until they're asked the question and invited to explore that concept. And then it's about trying to find the right tools and options to make that happen for them and realise it.
Thanks, Morris. I'm aware of what the questions are coming up, so I'm not going to go into the barriers yet because that's coming up.
I might change them. You never know.
Okay, well that's right. Well, I'll come back to what I wanted to say. But in terms of how we do it from a PQSA perspective, we are the peak spinal cord injury community body, but we do way too much about you without you. I sit on a group of 8 peer organisations, Spinal Injury Alliance, and we have 8 middle-aged male CEOs sitting around the table talking about what you do. However, we do amazing peer support advocacy, and we do have people living with disability supporting people with disability, and they do a fantastic job, and we are building on that. We also identify opportunities to influence government with their decision-making around infrastructure. And it's appalling that we actually have to do that for things like changing places, for instance, and having accessible bathrooms where people with the need to be able to address their toileting needs don't have accessible changing places in places like the Royal Adelaide and the Adelaide Oval. So that is how we do it. We act at that level.
Just one of the things that we're conscious with the community visitor scheme is that we visit around 600 disability houses, accommodation places across the state, and our role is to go in and to make sure that individuals with a whole range of disabilities, including people who may not have a voice, may have an intellectual disability, may not have any informal or family supports, and check on their individual support plans, and that the staff are working with them as far as possible to ensure that they're reaching their full potential, whatever that may be. And they're the sort of things that I'm hoping that will be brought into the new National Disability Insurance Scheme plan, so that the voice and the support is for a whole for everyone who's going to have a plan in the future.
It sounds fantastic, but it's not easy to do. And you look after a lot of people who aren't able to make decisions for themselves. How do you? What are some of the barriers, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, great question. So for those who don't know, people who are appointed, where I'm appointed as adult guardian for them, are adults with mental incapacity. So it ranges from older people to younger people, acquired brain injury, mental health, lifetime associated disabilities. So we need to make decisions in the shoes of those people. And this is my plug for supported decision making. We need to understand what that means. Jocelyn talked about no assumptions. She talked about enabling people to have the voice. Supported decision making isn't a legislative framework, but it's something that many of us are working on. We want to implement it as a practice so people can be supported to make their own decisions as far as possible. It's not just agreeing with their decisions, it's actually a process. And we're in our infancy, I think, but it's the one thing our office is really trying to research and practice and develop this in our own decision-making people, for people with impaired decision-making.
Yeah, I think, to build on what we're saying here today, I think it's people's negative attitudes and, just taking a personal look at it and how we behave towards people that we work with, that we see in our communities, and looking at our attitudes. There's so many times that we hear people with cognitive or physical disability being told, oh, you'll never be able to do that. So it's quite simple. Let's look at our behaviours and those behaviours around us to make sure that, people with disability is at the forefront. So,
Thank you.
I think we're years away from understanding the divide between dignity of care and dignity of risk. Restrictive practices are about ensuring as service providers and supporters that we don't do anything that restricts the choice and control of the vulnerable individuals within our care and support. And yet there is an adversity. We are risk averse as a sector. We're risk averse as service providers, and we're unwilling to often to do things that might put that person at risk, even though they've actually been given a choice to do that. And Sue was telling us at the NDS State Committee this morning about a doctor who is threatening to take their staff to task and report to Today Tonight that their staff are refusing to restrict the dietary intake of one of their clients because he chooses not to eat the diet that doctor thinks they should be eating. That is wrong. That is someone who doesn't understand the difference between dignity of risk and dignity of care.
And then I think following on that concept of dignity at risk, it's how you then support people. So they've made a decision about what they want to do with their life and how they want to live it. And maybe if it doesn't go well, then how do you make sure that they can get through them and give that support to, they're still making the decision. It doesn't matter if things go wrong, everything goes wrong. And for anyone, no matter what your physical or cognitive ability looks like, it's then how do you help that person pick themselves back up and go, right, what's the next decision I want to make for myself?
Maurice?
Yeah, that duty of care versus dignity of risk is one that we come across a lot in housing and accommodation, and quite often where people have been living at home with families who have moved into accommodation services. And the services are trying to support people to get out and try new things, to experiment with new ways of doing things, etc., and get out and about in the communities. And sometimes it's families who are really saying, well, no, we really don't want that to happen. And so Richard Bruggeman's prepared a really good document, a paper called, it's around restrictive practices and better understanding for families. And it's been a really useful resource to promote, to get it out to there so that people can understand that it is so important for an individual's development to get to the edge, to try a few things, and sometimes to come unstuck, but learn from that to be able to move on and have another go another way.
Fantastic. What will the future look like? There's big change afoot. How do you think that's all going to pan out? Because I don't think anyone knows that at this stage, but let's give it a go at kind of predicting the future. Peter?
I guess I'm being honest. My fear is it's not going to look too different unless we make wholesale changes and wholesale reform across society, and from my point of view, I'd love to see every single person that undertakes a vocational education training course or a tertiary course, for it to have a component of inclusion and accessibility and choice and control, because society is affected by that profoundly. I'm off to the Gold Coast to talk about NDIS and whether the industrial relations system is keeping up, and I'm doing that talk tomorrow, and I can tell you they're not. So if we don't have other systems that allow us to have trained workers that can support people to have choice and control and to receive support at the times they want, in the manner they want, how do we change everything else? So it's a bit of a gloomy proposition. I think the NDIS will make a massive change. I think the LSA is definitely on the right track, and I'm not just saying that because they're awesome friends of PQSA, but I think we could learn from what the National Injury Insurance Scheme's partners are doing, because I think that they are actually doing that better than the NDIS is at this point in time.
Tamara?
I think it was following on from what Peter's saying, is that you can have, it's like assistive technology, and there's all sorts of technological ways to increase independence, and there's all sorts of initiatives you can have in place. But unless everyone, like the community, is understanding what inclusion means and what it means to, I suppose, like have someone back. Morris, that example you gave where your employer messaged you to say, I want to have you back when you're good and ready, we want to have you back. If there's, give people the opportunity to go back to employment because they feel included, they feel wanted, that's the key to, I suppose, what the future's going to look like, if it's going to look a lot brighter. And when you're talking, Jocelyn, about being able to be included in social activities because you have the access, you've got the support, people understand exactly, what you're able to give, well, that's the key to being, I suppose, as a future looking different, irrespective of all the technology you can put in place to increase independence and other initiatives.
Well, I think from my perspective, there is a lot of resources, information out there. It's really about making that more widespread, being able to get that to access all areas of the community. That's a really good point down the end of making it compulsory in an education or a degree. Because in every sector, you will always come across disability. By changing perspectives and educating people early on, you're actually allowing people to be equipped to actually communicate, to deal, to interact with people with a disability. And by integrating into that area, you're setting a forefront that enables people to be included, to be integrated into the community. And another area is actually giving people access to all those assistive technologies and support out there. I know some schemes allow people great access to support and services. I know I've got lots of people that I know under injury support schemes, but as someone with an acquired disability that doesn't have access to those support schemes, actually trying to access those services, those supports, is a whole nother challenge. And that shouldn't be another challenge. That shouldn't be another hurdle for people to jump over, to get the support they need and the technologies they need to be able to live life. So I hope moving forward that some of those things do change to actually enable that.
A lot of employers don't actually realise that those things are available as well. I think there's a lot of fear amongst employers that it's going to be expensive, there's going to be all sorts of adjustments that need to be made and so forth, but there's actually a lot of support for people available.
Yeah, there actually is. So me doing a research degree, I actually never got to touch a lab within university because nothing was accessible and there was no steps taken to make it accessible, despite numerous complaints, meetings and pushing with advocates. But as soon as I got a summer research scholarship during my undergrad, the lab had it completely renovated within 2 weeks to enable me to be able to go and work in a lab. That lab's still supporting me now. So by having that awareness, that education and knowledge that there is the resources out there to support people with a disability, it's not any more of a hassle. Like, people with disabilities, regardless of what ability they do have something really valuable to offer the workplace. So it's just, I think that's another education and awareness thing that has to be broken down because people have so much to offer.
Morris?
I think one of the big areas where we could learn from is in mental health, where there is a lot of people a lot of positions in all the acute mental health units and in mental health community services, where they do have peer consultants working. There is a peer course, a certificate for in peer counselling and support, but they also have carer consultants as well. And I just think the importance of having those people who have lived experience working right across a whole range of services and supports, and especially people who are, may acquire a disability and that return to work. The Job in Jeopardy program through the Commonwealth is an amazing job access. They can cover so much in terms of modifications and expenses, so that people are not having to put that money out to do that, and support people to reach their full potential, whatever they are. And the importance of peer work. We all seek out peers, whether in a profession of psychology or social work or whatever. We seek out peers to get that support to improve all the time. And I just think, within disability and a whole range of disability areas and spaces, there should be great potential in the future to have more people with lived experience being recognised for what they've got to offer.
Thanks, Morris. Tana, do you want to make any comment?
Yeah, just to add to that, I really feel that the freedom of choice needs to be made more meaningful for people with differing abilities to live and have fulfilment in their lives. And to be able to do that, we all need to be, innovative and step outside the square to think about how we can make that happen more so. I think that's really important.
Anne?
So in the future, I'll try and be positive and say that in the ideal world, we will see people employed. We will see them in the workforce with much greater visibility. We will have targets being achieved. We don't achieve them currently in Australia around employment. So we'll see that. We'll see people with disabilities living in independent accommodation that they deserve, not being in group homes and shared accommodation. And they will be supported by assistive technology to be able to do that. Your home is your place, your identity, your resting place. It's really important that people with disability have the same access to housing. And I think the supported decision making will be better educated and will be doing that. And of course, the people with lived experience are educating the rest of the community, and we're really serious about that training, not just online awareness.
Thank you. Well, it's an adaptive problem that we're talking about, that sort of layered and multi-systems are involved. But if you could have one wish for what you'd like to see that might make a big difference towards achieving your vision for the future, what would that be? What would be, where would you put your resources or your efforts?
My priority, and it's influenced by the work I do now with people with impaired decision making, I think I have to say the supported decision making. If I've got to pick one, I'll relate it to my current client group, and I think it's so important to empower them.
Great. Tana?
I'm going to be a bit broad, and I, was very empowered by Jocelyn's talk earlier. And I think, it's up to us personally to take a stance and to make some positive change on the impact of people around us in a positive way. And like Jocelyn said, it's not about parents and carers or service providers, but let's make some positive change to make a great difference and move forward.
Jocelyn?
I think for me, moving forward, one of the steps that I've highlighted that would probably make the biggest difference is education and awareness. I think for me, by having or increasing education and awareness, all those other things will fall into place. There will be increased funding, increased access to support, because hopefully that will be known through that education, that support is required, that support should be a right by everyone, and ultimately education and awareness by everyone within society should lead to that.
Thank you.
I think it's how we can connect people with lived experience with each other, and how we can make sure that when we're connected with those people with lived experience, so we can learn as much as possible from them and be guided, I suppose, that they're driving the decision making about how we provide services, how we change our community clubs, our social clubs, how we change workplaces to make them accessible and actually feel really inclusive for them.
For me, it'd be nice to be able to retire and be able to call up a whole range of new, young advocates from a whole range of different backgrounds or experiences of disability and their families whenever an old fellow like me needed a bit of support in the long term. So for me, to have a fresh, new, whole batch of people with lived experience who are very skilled, very talented, articulate young people who can advocate and support a whole range of people with disabilities in the general community.
I'm developing up a couple of those in my team. It's very exciting. Peter?
I do want a fully accessible community without having to bloody well ask for it. However, that's not my one wish, because that's just a no-brainer. My one wish is that the NDIS in particular does actually look and learn from the lessons that it can learn and the mistakes it makes, and make sure that every single participant meets that goal of reasonable and necessary. We've had a few years of it now. I know we're very early stages in South Australia, but we're still not learning the lessons, and we've still got the haves and the have-nots. So if someone wants to live in a group home or in an individual home, wants their support at, midnight, that they've got the funding and the support necessary, and it's included in their plan, and they don't have to go to Brain Injury SA to appeal it. That's my one wish.
Fantastic. Well, over to you. So there's a little bit of time for questions from you, and we've got a couple of roving microphones. So please put your hands up and we'll see how we go with getting to you. A couple of hands up already. Thank you. One down here as well.
Hi. You've touched on the world of work, but I just wanted to ask a bit more of a specific question. Assumptions are horrible, you're absolutely right, Jocelyn, and I think everyone with a disability that's in the workforce finds that from time to time. I see one of the biggest things out there as stigma, and I'm just wondering, and that's not a word I've heard any of you actually use today, I'm wondering how you start to break down that stigma with employers and how you make them accountable for some of those decisions that they do or don't make.
I think we need to get to the leaders of organisations, and we need to embrace them with stories of success and demonstrate what's possible, and get some champions. There are some in South Australia. Nikki's now EO Commissioner, but in my work at the Commission, we'd started some conversations. There are some great employers who lead by example. Once you get the leadership taking ownership through their heart and head, you've got a chance, and they'll start leading the way. But, it's hard work, but I think we need to set some targets. The South Australian Government could lead by example in setting some employment targets and getting stuck into this. It's a really important area.
We've had a state strategic plan target that's been languishing there for a little while now, so perhaps bringing that back and reinvigorating it. Morris?
Yeah, look, I think at one stage we had a really proactive disability employment register here in South Australia, and we had a large organisation who supported that register to make sure that all those people who wanted to get a job in government, both in state government here, but also at a national level, we need to have these disability employment registers where there's a list of people who are work ready, work toughened, and that just like other programs in state government, that when vacancies become available, then the people advertising can be connected up to those people who are work ready to give them opportunities to do it. There's great organisations like Employers Making a Difference and the National Employer Network that's got all the research about the benefits of a diverse workforce, including people with disabilities, and the many benefits that brings to the workplace when they have good job matching between the skills of the person with a disability versus the actual requirements of the job.
Yeah, let alone a phenomenal difference to our GDP from an economic perspective as well. Anyone else want to make a comment on this?
I think in terms of breaking down that stigma, it's really about raising awareness. I know within the Paralympic sector, there is a Paralympic employment program with one organisation around Australia, but I think that's just a start by actually raising awareness of what people with a disability can offer the workforce, really breaking down that stigma that people with a disability aren't capable of having a job. by breaking that down and actually going, actually, people with a disability can complete a job in the same way that anyone else and actually offer a lot or have a lot to offer the workplace is one major step of moving forward.
Great. We've got lots of questions. So another question down the front here. We'll get back to you, sorry.
Yeah, two questions, and I speak as somebody who is disabled, but was told I wasn't going to walk, and I do walk. First of all, one question is about occupational health and safety, and this is actually before I was injured. A friend of mine who had a traffic accident, was in a wheelchair, works for a big engineering company. He could never go on site because of occupational health and safety. That tells me that there are issues there. It comes back to your risk and people not wanting to take the risk. And in the private sector, they're petrified of insurance. So that may well be a policy area that should be considered. The other one, Jocelyn, is for you and not for you, in the sense that as, Jocelyn, I think you may remember me from Hydro. No, it doesn't matter. Basically, I was a master athlete before I had my accident. One of my frustrations is that there isn't really much for master athletes. There's a lot for the elite athlete at para level. Once after that, after Open, there is nothing, particularly in track and field. And it's sort of an area that I think that maybe there needs to be more advocacy on. Thank you.
So just in terms of masters in parasport, that is already has been identified as a huge gap within the para sector. I believe that the World Masters Games is in the process of implementing a para section within some sports, but I think that really is a process that really needs to be identified not only across the World Masters Games but all sporting organisations, because sport's a great platform for people to connect with others with lived experiences and move forward. Because when you connect with someone within sport, it's been brought up about peer support and mentoring. That's just one opportunity where those connections can be made, and it's really valuable in overall life. So I think that is definitely something that is in the spotlight a little bit, but definitely not enough, but it should be pursued. In terms of occupational health and safety, I think for me, like you've mentioned engineering, but within research, within a lab environment, occupational health and safety is one of the biggest things, especially in a lab that I work in. But it's really about breaking down those barriers. Initially, I was told that I couldn't take a wheelchair into a lab because of contamination risk. But what difference is wearing shoes or something like that? Yes, it's a much bigger object, but it's breaking down those policies. Yes, there was a policy in place that prevented it. You couldn't take a chair in, so apparently a wheelchair is the same. It was put under that category. But it's breaking down those barriers. You need people going through, questioning, challenging those decisions, those policies to actually make it change, I believe.
It's much easier to say no, though, isn't it? And that's what you've experienced.
It's in so many areas, you can get the answer no, but unless you challenge it and you have someone that's in a position to be able to challenge it, no change will be made.
Peter?
I guess as an employer of over 500 people, I can understand where that employer's coming from, because the penalties for having an unsafe workplace are huge. Return to work premiums can be huge. However, the fact they said it can't be done, I think, is codswallop. It can be done. We've heard that, and I'm sure it is. So we need to champion good case studies. And we've actually also given a scholarship to someone with a spinal cord injury to do their masters in occupational health and safety. He doesn't know it yet, but he's going to recreate the world in that space.
Just to build on that, the penalties, you're spot on. I was going to mention that. But other acts like the Disability Discrimination Act or Equal Opportunity Act in South Australia does have nothing like those penalties. So the incentive is a bit perverse in that employers will lean on the penalties of, I'm going to be guided by that act, not the Discrimination Act, because that's the one that's going to cost me, and it's an imbalance. And I think it does lead to decisions based on work health and safety, and I know that happens in education, teachers, schools, kids' poor behaviour. What do they put first? The WHS
Or the Equal
legislation or the
Opportunity
EO?
Act.
And I know
Yeah.
what their answer is.
Yeah, so the Equal Opportunity Act requires that employers and others make reasonable adjustments. It's what's called reasonable is the question, I guess.
I think once again it's about educating what is reasonable. I know I recently just lectured in an education topic at Flinders University to students that will next year be going out and teaching. But it's by giving people education on what reasonable, what pathways and what modifications they can put in place to make it safer, to eliminate risk. That's what's going to change that. And once again, demonstrating, if someone can demonstrate that there's no risk or they can reduce risk, unfortunately that's one step that the person with a disability or the advocate usually has to take, but that's usually one way of convincing an employer that maybe something can work, something can be modified to allow some sort of participation.
Fantastic. Other questions? We had another question. Yeah? This one here.
Yeah, hi. What frustrates me incredibly is gutters. And I literally mean gutters. I'm wondering, it's not just gutters, but it's how do you actually get into the government's head to say, okay, we've got accessible buses, but now that I've got off the bus, where do I go? Down the gutter.
Yeah. Look, it's a really important issue, and access pathways from where you live to where you go to shop to where you go to school or where you go to work. I've found that more often than not, local governments, if they know that individuals have a specific route that they're going to that is impeded by not good access, they're usually very responsive. Most of the local governments that I'm aware of have their own action plans and have budgets to address in priorities those sort of access paths for people with disabilities. And if someone contacts their local government about that, then I've found we've had really good results by going through that process, and I would encourage you to do that.
Thanks. A lot of you talked about the role of lived experience in helping to educate the community, politicians and policymakers. How do we prevent that going too far?
I think it comes back to, so for example, Lifetime Support Authority is a service provider. It's coming back to when you're working with someone with a disability, it's treating them as a person. So where you're saying is that everything feels intrusive and the questions, sometimes you're not sure how they bear relationship back to the service being provided, is being very clear about, well, this person's in charge of what information they give us and how they give it to us and what it is that we're going to do with that information to give them a service. So I think it's very much, if the person is at the centre of that decision making, they're also then, like you said, you're avoiding that sort of disability porn where they're feeling like they're just bearing their soul, and it's actually about, well, what are they comfortable and how can we work with them in the best way that makes it comfortable and safe and feels right for them in getting them the services.
Yeah, and I understand that your concern is that they're having to provide a lot more information than what is necessary. I think the NDIS is probably still in its teething stages. I'd hope that maybe some of the questions do change a bit. But in the overall perspective, at this stage, it potentially, a question like, do you have any friends, could actually help guide decision making and exploration of goals and targets to work towards, such as how to get someone further integrated within the community. So although at the surface it looks like a lot of questions about a person, ultimately the NDIS is trying to achieve a goal on understanding a person's needs, current situation, and how they can best support them, even if they're not doing it perfectly at the moment. But that is their goal.
Peter, last comment, I'm afraid.
Hi, Katie. You and I have both worked or are working in rehab, and in that bizarre world where someone thinks it's okay to ask if another person's used their bowels today in the middle of a dining room. The NDIS, I talked about getting to the point where they learn from the lessons, and we're still at the point where that person is absolutely bearing their soul, and they're being asked questions that none of us who are not living with disability would ever be asked in any sane world. But planners are still making assumptions on behalf of those future participants and saying, you know what, okay, that's what you've told me, but I actually know best, and unfortunately the plans are now coming out and are not always reflecting what that conversation has been. So again, I get back to that fundamental system change and understanding if we're talking NDIS and sector reform.
Thank you to all of our speakers, and thanks to the event partners, Lifetime Support Authority, PQSA, Brain Injury SA, Department for Communities and Social Inclusion, IPA and Open State. Thank you all for coming, and please enjoy the rest of your day.